I want to welcome everybody to our Transplant Next. It's our part of our youth, part of the World Transplant Games Federation. It's our committee. And we have a great webinar set up for you guys today. We are going to be discussing participating in research as a patient partner and how families can get involved in transplant research. We have two great speakers for you today. I have Elaine Yong, who is a mother of a pediatric heart transplant recipient. And then she's also involved in research as a patient partner with the Canadian Donation and Transplant Research Program and other specific research projects, as well as she sits on the board currently of the Transplant Research Foundation of BC. And then also professionally, she is a manager of communications and community engagement at BC Transplant. Our other guest speaker today is Kristi Coldwell, and she is the Senior Advisor for Transplant Research Advocacy at the Transplant Research Foundation of BC. She is also a heart transplant recipient herself, and she believes patients and caregivers have an important role in shaping and informing health research to ensure it's meaningful and accountable to all stakeholders. So I do welcome both of our guest speakers today, and I'm going to go ahead and give the floor over to them for their presentation. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Ashley. And thank you for those of you who are tuning in and joining our talk today. Hopefully Kristi and I will keep you entertained and hopefully you learn a few things as we go. We're going to keep it pretty casual. I would love to hear where people are from and what their connection is to transplant and donation. So if you want to pop that in the chat, I think it's always nice to get to know some of the people. And then I'm going to share my screen. Okay, hang on, moving everything around here. All right, so hello, everyone. I'll let Kristi say hello quickly. You guys see her?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
So our talk today is all about engaging in research. And you know, this is very different than a research study, being a participant in one, and we'll explain all of that. So first, we just wanted to acknowledge that we're gathered here today together to learn, share, and connect on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded Coast Salish lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. I'm located in what's known as the city of Vancouver.
And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining from the lands of the Stolo, the Kwantlen, and the Catsees Nations, which is, of course, Maple Ridge, BC.
So as Ashley shared with you a little bit about me already, yes, I think my most important title is that I'm the mom of Addison, who is a heart transplant recipient. She received her heart transplant when she was just over 3 weeks old, and will be celebrating her 13th birthday in a couple of weeks. So I am a former television journalist and currently, as Ashley mentioned, communications in healthcare, specifically right now working at BC Transplant, which is our organ donation organization in the province of BC. In Canada, all of the organ donation organizations are separated by province because healthcare is provincially mandated. I am a board member of the Transplant Research Foundation, and then I'm involved in a lot of different research projects in various ways, and we'll explain a little bit more about that as we continue.
Thanks. Elaine, sorry, guys. In a nutshell, you've already heard a little bit more about me, but I have essentially spent the majority of my life in our healthcare system, first as a congenital heart patient, and then, of course, later as a heart transplant recipient, receiving a heart transplant when I was 17 years old, and of course, enduring all that encompasses. And this August actually will mark 24 years of life that I have been able to live because of my donor heart. And all of this has really motivated me to give back, to want to become more involved. And that is particularly related to the world of research. And so much like Elaine, I have served in various capacities as a patient partner. We'll touch on some of those a little bit later, but I'm currently part of the Organ Donation Transplant Collaborative that is led by Health Canada. And I serve as the co-chair for that, leading a group of patients, families, and donors in that work. But really, at the end of the day, I'm just incredibly thankful to be alive after 2 decades with the same heart and to have enjoyed building a life with my husband and caring for little senior rescue dogs. That's me in a nutshell, who I am.
Oops, I think I'm getting
You
a
might have
little
skipped one.
space happy. Hang on. Let's go back. Okay. So today we're going to talk a little bit about why do we need patients to be involved in research as partners? What can you get out of it if you do participate in research as a patient partner? What is research? Because I think some of us have lots of ideas of what research is, but we'll talk a little bit about that. And also, how can you get involved in research? If that's something, after you listen to us talk, if you think this sounds really interesting, then we'll try to help you at least get started. So, I think the number one question is, why are we so passionate about research? And Kristi talked a little bit about that when she was introducing herself. And, I echo everything that she said, that to me, once we started on this road of transplant with Addison, it was this whole new world that I quickly realized was really powered by science. Sorry. That everything that was happening to Addison, everything involving the research, everything around the medical care that she was receiving was really all about science and research. And excuse me, when I started to think back to when transplant first happened, and you think it's actually a fairly young medical procedure, and really how we got to where we are today, to all you people joining us from around the world, and it's because of research and science. So further on that, what I wanted to share with you was this photo, and I'm sure a lot of you have probably seen this photo before, the historical photo in the upper left there. This was actually selected as the Nat Geo Picture of the Year for 1987, and the patient, Thaddeus, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, is lying on the table, but you see him in the picture below holding the image. That's him 25 years after his transplant. And to me, what this really symbolizes is, if you think of 1987, you see the exhausted surgeon sitting there next to the patient, keeping vigil, the other healthcare worker in the corner who's just crashed. And you think of just the intensity and the newness of this. And even though this wasn't obviously the first heart transplant, what this symbolizes to me was sort of the advent of when transplant medicine really sort of came to the forefront, because this was after the discovery of immune suppression drugs. So, for many years, transplants weren't really that successful because they hadn't figured out how to control rejection. And how did that come about? Through research. And I think, when you really look at that photo, and then you look at the photo on the right, which is actually Addison, when just after she'd received her transplant back in 2011, I think, you see how far science has come. Not saying that there isn't a lot more we still need to do, but to me, when I think of why I want to be involved in research, it's because in another, 25, 30 years, what's the next picture going to look like?
And so really building on what Elaine has already touched on, the fact of the matter is I'm here talking to you all because of the many advancements in organ donation and transplant medicine over the years. And these advancements have been made possible because of research. And, it's not enough for me, though, to just be a passive benefactor of those research outputs. I want to have a voice in helping to shape that research. I really want to ensure that I'm helping to bring forward my experiences and my lived knowledge. The fact of the matter is also that, I'm the one that takes those handfuls of potent and toxic medication, as many of you also do. And we all know that those come with a lot of side effects. And it's me that has to endure those painful and at times invasive testing and procedures that, of course, accompany transplant life. But it's also myself and my family that's learned how we need to cope to try to manage those trials and tribulations that come with life as a recipient. And it's because of all of this that I want to be involved in research. And for me, research is what gives me hope. It gives me hope of a brighter and a better future, one in which there are improved outcomes and improved quality of life, as well as overall survival. Next slide. And so, of course, we're here today fundamentally to talk more about what engagement of patients and caregivers in health research can look like and what that means. But given the international stage in which we're presenting on today, of course, you're from throughout the world, I do want to just acknowledge that there are different names that can be given to describe this approach to research. And so in Canada, the Canadian Institutes for Health Research actually define this and coin this as strategies for patient-oriented research. And their slogan is putting patients first. So that is engaging those research very early on in the process. And of course, throughout the world, there's different names that is given to this approach. So in the UK, it's often referred to as public involvement in research. And then in the US, we have those patient-centered outcome research institute. But regardless of the name that is used to this approach in research, there really are some core concepts that are pervasive across the board. And that is really seeing patients and caregivers as central to the research process and as partners in that research process. And really recognizing that the focus is on those patient-identified research priorities and patient outcomes. And also understanding that there is really a shift in the culture of research and how that research is being undertaken, how it used to be done to what we're talking about now, and how that involves really a multidisciplinary approach, and that there are key stakeholders that are involved in that work. Everything from the researchers to those healthcare clinicians to patients and caregivers, as well as stakeholders. And it's really bringing together all these diverse perspectives where that real magic happens, where we can ensure that research is more inclusive as well as much more robust. Next slide. Oh, it's me again. So just like there's many different names for the approach to meaningful engagement, so too are there a lot of different names or identifiers that can be used when describing individuals that possess that lived or living experience. It is the focus of health research. You're already hearing Elaine and I today really emphasizing those terms patients and caregivers and families. And you can see from this word cloud here, these are some other possible names that can be given. It's really about recognizing it's what makes the most sense for you. So what most resonates for you? How do you want to be identified in this research? And of course, in the field of organ donation transplantation, you'll often also hear the term patient, family, donor, partner. But at the end of the day, no matter what the name is, it's really recognizing, ensuring that those individuals that possess the lived or living experience that is the focus of the research or the relevant health topic have a seat at the table, are involved in helping to shape that research.
Okay, so Kristi and I both really love this cartoon separately. It was funny. She'd done other presentations and she sent me her slides, and I had already picked this cartoon. I mean, it really just encompasses what this is all about. You know, a lot of people will say things like, a lot of patients will be like, oh, you know, I'm not a scientist. Like, I don't really understand. Like, I don't know what research, like, I feel very lost. And these people who are doing the research are super smart and have, 25 years of PhDs and other degrees. But the key here to remember is that you are an expert in your journey, in your story, in your medical care, and you have a lot to say about it. Like anyone who's a transplant or on the donor side, you've been in the system, which gives you a lot of experience that, let's face it, a lot of these researchers and scientists and even doctors themselves, they don't have the experience of what it's like to be on the other side. And that is the really important perspective that you bring as a patient. So don't undersell your knowledge and expertise. You do not need to be a scientist. You don't even need to have your, grade 12 biology to make a difference in the world of patient engagement. If you think about when you go to an appointment, have you ever thought to yourself, oh man, this would go so much better if they could change these things about the process? Or, why do we have to take so much medication? Is it possible that we could get away with a little bit less anti-rejection medication? Has anyone ever looked at that? Should I be getting this vaccine? Like, there's just so many questions that you probably have. And that's all part of what research is. It's supposed to help answer those questions. And who better to ask the questions and to help answer them than the people who are actually involved. And, you also have to think about the timing for you. Sure, you are an expert, but maybe this is not the right time for you to be engaged in research. It has to come at a time where you're at a good place in your health journey and that you can share your experience, but frame it in a way that you bring that bigger picture perspective into the discussions with the researchers. So I think the very important distinction is that there's a big difference between being a partner in research versus a participant. I'm sure actually many of you have probably participated in research in terms of, giving blood work or tissue samples or filling out surveys or answering questions or taking part in some kind of focus group. That is not being a patient partner. So when we talk about being the subject of a research project, they're studying you. But the difference is in a partnership, you are contributing to the project, not as a subject. It's really meaningful engagement and active collaboration. And you'll hear Kristi and I using those terms a lot because it can't be this sort of token, well, we need a patient to be part of the study, so we're going to put you on our research team. It has to be the patient really engaged in setting everything from the topic of the research project to how it's actually carried out. Like, do we think 3 visits to the research lab over the course of 6 months is too much? Should we be compensating people if they're coming to the research lab to pay for their parking? What about paying for childcare if we're trying to engage families? Like, that's where you come in as the patient partner to say, you know what, this is unreasonable. This timing doesn't work for a lot of people. Kids are in school, or this is spring break. A lot of people might be away, like it is right now for us. And then also right through to the results. How are we going to share these results? How are we going to use these results? And that's where your expertise can come in to say, I think this is something that all families with transplant kids should know. I think all transplant people should know this. We need to get this information out. We should share it on social media. I think this video doesn't make sense. Those are some of the things that you can be involved in as a partner, not as a participant.
So excuse me, there are numerous reasons why it's so vital to ensure that the voices and the perspectives and patients and caregivers are embedded in research. And I think we can all appreciate the fact that these are the individuals that really do possess those unique firsthand insights and awareness of what it means to live or to have lived with those conditions, those diseases, and all that that encompasses. And it really is this experiential knowledge, so this expertise that can be brought to that research to really help ensure that that research is much more meaningful as well as relevant to the individuals that the research is intending to help. And further to that, it's about recognizing that those are the voices, especially those diverse perspectives, that need to be involved in helping to set those priorities and really establishing those research questions, because this is where you're going to create those themes or those new areas of study that perhaps those researchers and investigators wouldn't otherwise have thought about. And again, at the end of the day, it's also about recognizing that those research outputs, so those findings, those results, or even those interventions are much more likely to be relevant and useful and benefit the people that they were intending to help. And this is going to lead to improvements in that service access as well as delivery. So there's a lot of different reasons why it's so important, but fundamentally it's about ensuring that you are really including those individuals and helping to shape the research, especially if that research is intending to help those people. Next slide. Oh.
Thanks, Kristi. So, Kristi talked a little bit about this in the last slide, but it's not just about you giving to the research team and giving of your time and expertise. It's also really, I have to say, it's really empowering to know that you have a voice and that you can make a difference. And like, one of the reasons that I started in this world was because I said to myself, when Addison first got her transplant, I'm like, man, these statistics, they kind of suck. I just, I'd look at these survival statistics and I think that we have to be able to do better than this. And, one of the things I thought about when we were in that sort of like finally out of the woods post-transplant was how can we give back? And we thought about, fundraising for our children's hospital. Some families had raised money to put new TVs into the patient rooms, which, as we know, super useful and makes a huge difference in your hospital stay. But then I was thinking long term, what can I do that will actually maybe change the trajectory for kids like Addison? And if not her, for the next kid or the next adult who's getting a transplant. So you feel really empowered when you're involved in this level that can hopefully make that difference, that change that picture from that historic photo of, the poor surgeon sitting next to that guy on the table to a different story. You can also really build on some of your skills and build new skills. You increase your confidence, you understand the language, and you feel a lot more involved in your care, I think, by understanding the research. And, when Kristi talked about changing the system and improving care and outcomes, that's the ultimate goal, is you want to make a difference for you. And if not for you or your loved one who's undergone transplant or donation, it's to make a difference for the future, because that's the only way we're going to get to the next level, like in this ideal state where none of the transplant recipients have to take those drugs anymore. That would be my wish.
The ultimate dream.
Yes, I think it's the ultimate dream for all of us. So we wanted to also give you guys just a little bit of background about what is research. There's a lot of language in the world of research that can be confusing. It's kind of, if you're not really involved, it's this weird nebulous thing that all these people with large words floating around. But in common language, research is the search for knowledge or truth. By definition, the systematic investigation into and the study of materials and sources in order to establish facts and reach new conclusions. So this video, I think it's 4 minutes long, but a really great explanation. I'm just going to make sure that we're able to share the audio. I'm going to play this and see if this works. Can you guys hear this okay? No?
I have no sound.
No sound, yeah.
For researchers in some disciplines.
Okay, I'm starting again.
What comes to mind when you think about research? Probably a laboratory with test tubes, microscopes, and scientists wearing white lab coats. This setup is ideal for researchers in some disciplines, such as virologists studying viral infections, physicists developing new electronic devices, or chemists creating new materials. Other possibilities, such as someone digging through historical archives or someone distributing surveys about consumer preferences, may also come to mind. That's research too. So what is research? What unites these very different approaches? They share the same fundamental goal, the creation of new knowledge or ideas. Every good research project begins with a question that has no known answer. These questions vary from field to field. A research product can be something tangible, such as a new drug for curing a particular disease, or it can be intangible, such as a new understanding of an archival text. Many people associate the idea of research with the scientific method, a cyclical process of posing questions and reaching conclusions. The first step in this process is making observations and asking questions. Then, the researcher formulates hypotheses, or educated guesses, that try to answer those questions and develops experiments to collect data and produce results. The results help the researcher to form a conclusion. The final step of the scientific method is sharing the results of the research with other scholars so that they can observe, verify, and ask their own questions. This process is an ongoing loop that pushes discovery and innovation forward. But the processes and principles of the scientific method aren't limited to the sciences. When a literary scholar reads a number of texts by authors writing in the same time period and notices thematic similarities, they're making observations. When they ask why these themes are important to the writers in this time period, they're asking a research question. Then they might argue that the particular themes they are seeing are a result of certain economic or social conditions that characterize that time period. This is a hypothesis. In order to collect data, the scholar can read more texts from that time period and contrast them with texts from other periods to see if there are sufficient similarities and differences. Finally, they can publish their work and allow other scholars to study it and ask their own questions. Maybe you have a burning question that you'd like to solve, or perhaps you're itching to join an existing research team. Luckily, there are numerous ways that you can get involved with research. One pathway that leads to a career in research involves attending college and eventually pursuing an advanced degree such as a PhD. But even people who don't have a college education can contribute to research projects, for instance by participating in surveys or helping researchers gather data. Through research, you can contribute to tackling major obstacles of our generation, from conserving endangered species to monitoring public health crises. As long as you're curious and hardworking, research is for you. What comes to mind when you think about research?
Sorry, guys, I'm trying to
Probably
stop
elaborate.
this now. Okay, I think we're back on track.
Yes, we are. And that is an excellent segue into the many opportunities. So that was touched on very briefly in this video, but it's something that I want to delve into just a little bit more because, of course, we're really emphasizing or kind of discussing a little bit more about being a patient or family partner as part of a research project. And that's a really amazing way to be engaged. But there's a lot of different activities or roles for patient and family partners as part of health research. So these include serving on various steering committees or governance councils, helping to, again, identify those priorities, be involved in the decision making, as well as serving as a reviewer when funding decisions for research are made. So this is often referred to as peer review. And this is when scientific reviewers and those patient family partner reviewers come together to review those applications. And this is not where you, as a patient, family, or partner reviewer, are expected to assess those applications for the scientific merit or validity or any of that garble. It's where you are, again, using that experiential knowledge and expertise, looking at that engagement component that may be embedded, or potentially also suggesting alternative solutions or ideas around how that engagement could be enhanced and supported, but also looking to those projects that are involving those patient participants and looking at, are there any additional considerations that maybe the research team hadn't considered that could impact those individuals' participation? So it's along those lines that you look to those applications as a patient and family partner reviewer. But what I love, and again, this is by no means an exhaustive list. It just provides you with some ideas that there's a lot of different opportunities outside of just being a patient partner on a research project or study. But what I really love about this is that because that meaningful engagement really can be applied to any and all types of health research, that patient family partners can be involved in, of course, those more patient facing projects and qualitative areas, but also more of that bench science or more of that like basic research or bench science as it's referred to. And that's really that sciencey stuff. So the stuff that's occurring in the lab or with mice. And I do think there's often a belief by a lot of patients and caregivers, as well as researchers, that there's no value there to ensure you're including those perspectives and voices. But that's not true. It is becoming much more recognized that there is a lot of value to be had to ensure that patient and family partners are at least being engaged at some level in more of that basic science project. So again, we won't get into too much around what that can exactly look like, but it's about recognizing that you can take your expertise and be involved in an assortment of research activities across the spectrum of research, depending where your interest and your skill set lies. Next slide. Perfect. And so this is one we wanted to touch on again, because this is going to provide some context for what Elaine and I are also going to be discussing very shortly coming up in these slides. And this is really an image that depicts the research cycle. And again, we're not expecting you to understand what this means or what all of these individual pieces are. But what I do want to really put forward here and emphasize is as patient and family partners, again, it's part of that research project. You can be engaged in any of these stages in that research cycle. It is about what makes the most sense for the research, but also for you as an individual. Where do your areas of interest lie? What is your skill set? And I think recognizing that it can occur right at the very beginning. I know we have touched on that, but that's really around identifying those priorities, helping to formulate and define those research questions, right through to that execution of that research project. So when you start to actually help to shape that research and put and develop the materials. And of course, you can also be involved in looking at those the preliminary results and the findings, identify themes that maybe the research team hadn't considered, right through to disseminating those project findings and the results out there to the larger community. Again, so not thinking about the academic world as much as other patients, families, and donors, and recognizing that you serve as that link from that research and helping other patients, families, and donors understand what it's all about. Perfect. And that actually ties in nicely to what Lane and I are going to touch on now. And that's actually some real world application of what we've discussed today around how patient and family partners can be engaged, sharing our own experiences. So for myself, I've been fortunate over the years to be engaged in a variety of capacities. And I wanted to touch on a couple of the projects that I've been engaged in and what that looked like. And so one of those projects that I was fortunate to be involved in alongside 3 other patient family partners was around a peer mentorship program for our local heart transplant and LVAD, so left ventricular assist device program in BC. And this was a program that was exploring the feasibility of this mentorship. And because this did have such a strong patient facing component, it really made sense to ensure that there was really strong patient engagement of the partners as well. And so myself and another patient partner worked alongside developing that recruitment material. So we actually created the poster that was shared and distributed in the community, put up in the clinics that was seeking those participants to enroll in this study. And we also worked on co-developing and co-creating the interview guide, because this was a project that was dealing with one-on-one interviews. And so we worked alongside those researchers, really helping to ensure that the questions that were going to be posed made sense, that they were understandable, and that they were also likely to elicit the types of feedback that those researchers were hoping to obtain. And so that was one area of research. And then another project was, again, more of that scientific area of study. And it was a really complicated area, and it focused on the project title was willingness to cross. But what that meant was it was looking at highly sensitized patients. So these are patients that have a high degree of antibodies in their body, and potentially transplanting these patients with donors who have similar antibodies that would traditionally be contradictory, and looking at what the threshold for those transplants would be. And so myself and other patient partners, there were again 3 other ones in that project, all from really diverse walks of life, enabling us to bring really unique insights and perspectives, enriching that work. And when we first met with the research team, we said, listen, we don't understand anything you're saying. And if we don't understand what you're saying, you're really not going to be able to communicate any of these concepts to any of those patient participants, or really throughout that research landscape. You're going to have challenges because even other healthcare professionals don't necessarily know what these concepts are. So this really grounded that research team, and they realized that you're right. Like, this is the world we're enmeshed in, and we live and breathe, but that's not the case for most everybody else. And so there was a lot of discussion at the beginning around just understanding what this research meant and what some of those priorities could be. This really challenged that team, the research team, to expand their understanding and ways of thinking. And because the material was so complicated, and really complex. We were involved throughout the project, really co-creating many of those project documents. And so then when it came to wrapping the study up and working on the publication, this was a really interesting experience as well, because given the strong science component, we didn't think we had a lot of value to add here, but the team recognized that we did, and they wanted to ensure that we were able to provide our feedback, review the manuscript, and ensure that our experiences were adequately reflected in that document, and it really reflected what had occurred throughout the project design. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on a project that I was involved in, and this really reflects engagement at the highest end of the spectrum. So this is one that is really patient-led and patient-initiated, and that's not always the case. This is a type of research that is incredibly rewarding, but it does involve a lot of energy and a lot of resources. So it's not something that occurs all the time, but when it does, it's really amazing. And so this was a project that myself and other patient and family partners were involved in. It was us that created the idea of this project. We brought forward our experiences and helped to take shape into a research question. And then throughout the entire study, we were involved in leading this work. And this really led to, I think, the success of the project, ensuring that we heard from over 1,000 patients, families, and donors throughout Canada. That's a really high response rate for this type of a project. And, we were successful in also having 2 publications that stemmed from this. But most importantly, this was a project that really resonated and reflected with a lot of other patients, families, and donors throughout our country. And so I will just end there and show how, and I hand this over to Elaine, but I think this really shows what this can look like in the real world and how it is feasible and doable. Even if you don't have a science background or all that, technical understanding or expertise.
Yeah, and to follow up with what Kristi talked about, that idea of like the complicated science stuff and not understanding, it's a really good exercise for those researchers to be forced into being able to explain their projects in an easy to understand way. Because let me tell you, the people who are funding these projects, they don't necessarily have science backgrounds in all the different disciplines, all these applications that come in. So the better the scientists are able to explain in regular person language what they are doing and why it's important and why people should be supporting it with money, then it's a win-win for them as well. And I think more and more researchers are starting to understand that. It's like, I can't just be in my lab doing this stuff that no one knows what I do if I want to keep this work going. So, on that front, one of the projects that I'm involved in is regulatory T cells that are taken from discarded thymuses and used as a treatment to prevent rejection. So this is very revolutionary and could, potentially be a way to end the use of anti-rejection drugs. But it's very complicated because you're talking about like T cells and the immune response and, how you take these thymuses and you have to expand these T cells and put them back in the patient. So like Kristi said, a lot of challenging, like, I need someone to explain this to me, and a lot of sort of knowledge digestion that had to happen for me to be involved with this project, but extremely rewarding. They've started clinical trials in Spain using the thymus T cell treatment on infants, babies with who've received heart transplants. So, like this is stuff that's happening now that you can be involved in. And so this project, there's a second part of it that's hoping to get funding here in Canada. So this is in its infancy. So for example, I've been involved with some of the setup meetings because I have a communications background. They're also planning to use some of my communications expertise as part of the knowledge translation. So knowledge translation, you hear that a lot in the scientific world. That's basically taking the findings of the research and sharing them with the world. Like how do you want to share that with the world? Who needs to know? How are you going to take this information and change practice? So for example, with this one, if this is successful, what's the next step? And who do we need to talk to get to that next step? So this is a really large project, but then there have been some other ones that Addison has participated in, for example, an exercise study. She was a participant, but we also provided feedback to the research team. And, it was funny because she did this is virtual exercise for kids with transplants during the pandemic. And she basically told the researchers, well, this is really lame. Exercise is boring. This virtual exercise is boring. Yeah, like I only did it because I signed up and my mom made me do it. But if you really want kids to be involved, you're going to have to change things up. So, like that was a participant, that traditional method of being part of research that we talked about, but also she provided feedback to the research team on the study itself. So it's not limited to adults either, because of course, if you want to study kids, you should probably get some input from them. So Addison's also reviewed documents, questions that are asked as part of research surveys, for example, and she's provided input that way. So I think, researchers who get it are really, really great at engaging on all different levels. The other studies that I've been involved with involve the chickenpox vaccine. Like, how many of you have been told, don't get live vaccines, right? Like, is that something that's just burned into your head? Do not get live vaccines. Well, the science is changing on that. And so they are starting to administer chickenpox vaccines to kids who have received transplants. So, here's an example of how being involved as a patient can change the way the research is done. So when they were starting to design this project, at one point there was some discussion amongst the scientists that, well, we shouldn't include heart transplant kids because it's the yellow light. So the International Pediatric Transplant Association had sort of assigned colors to the safety of giving chickenpox vaccine to transplant kids based on organs. And for the hearts, it was yellow. And then, we'd already gone down this road quite a bit. They'd gotten the funding already based on the fact that they were going to open this up to all transplant recipients of all organs. And I spoke up and I said, well, you applied for funding based on the fact that this was for all children. And if you exclude them now, if you exclude heart transplant recipients now, how are you going to include them again? You're going to have to apply for more funding. You're going to have to do another study. You say that you'll study them later, but the reality is you probably won't. So why not? You are giving the choice ultimately to the families and the kids and the parents if they want to participate. So if you let them know what the risks are, let them make the decision. Why would you exclude them right from the beginning? And so they did include the hearts in the end. So, but by having that patient voice, that's what made that difference. If it had just been a bunch of scientists sitting there without people like me or like you saying, hey, actually, I care about this and I'm willing to take that risk, and you shouldn't just take the choice out of my hands, then, that's what made that shift. The peer review. So I'm involved also with the Pediatric Heart Transplant Society on the scientific review committee. I have to tell you, 90% of what they're talking about, I have no idea what they're talking about. Okay. Like, there's just a lot of conversations, and, on the one hand, they don't treat me any differently because I'm a patient. They just have these scientific discussions and I don't understand most of it. But again, it's what can I help with? What do I understand? What am I able to contribute to this conversation? And I think it's, it can be intimidating, but just stick around long enough. And I think you'll find that you'll find a way to make a difference and to speak up when you need to. So we also talked about this already a little bit. How can you become engaged if you're really interested? And I think, the first place to start would be with your care team, with your transplant clinic. Ask the physicians, the nurses, the health practitioners, are they involved in research? Are they looking for patient partners? If they're not, maybe they should be. Go through your hospital or your healthcare center. There's usually a research institute attached. If you have a healthcare organization or a nonprofits associated with your medical experience, like if you're a kidney patient, there's probably a kidney organization, likely they're funding research, and they might have an avenue for you to get involved. All the universities and research institutes, it's become a really, this patient-oriented research, or whatever it's called in your country, it's become quite a big thing, and a lot of funding organizations are now requiring a component of patient involvement in research projects in order to qualify. So you can also do simple things like Google, like liver transplant recipient or patient partner research in the UK, and see what popped up, because some of these are listed on websites as well. We are getting some questions and we will get to them. The one question I think that's really good that we'll talk a little bit about in this next slide, Kristi will be speaking to this slide, is about compensation. And the bottom line is, yes, you should be compensated. But I'll let Kristi jump in here.
Exactly. Thanks, Elaine. So as we wrap up our presentation, I really wanted to emphasize here that you have rights as a patient and family partner in research. And really, one of those central rights is to have the information you need to make an informed decision around whether or not an engagement opportunity or an activity is the right fit for you. And so in order to do that, you of course need to ask questions. And so these questions, again, it's not an exhaustive list, but some of these are the key pieces you want to keep in mind. You want to ask, what is this engagement activity all about? What is the goal? You want to learn, how does that team or the organizer of the activity, what do they envision for your role? What are they expecting you to do? But on the flip side to that, you also want to do some critical reflection around how you want to be engaged and what you see as being able to contribute, and see how those two align. And if there is an alignment, you need to discuss that as well. But there's also those questions around, how does that research team or those organizers of that activity intend to support you? So this can take the form of training as well as that remuneration and compensation, and also being aware of what is it that you need to be supported to ensure that you're able to have that meaningful engagement facilitated. And to that point around that remuneration, I don't know how it exists throughout the country, but I know that is something that in Canada that is very much recognized as fundamental to the engagement relationship. It also really, it values and respects the experience that those patient and family partners are bringing to that activity, but it can also really help to break down barriers that can often prevent hearing from diverse perspectives. And so it's not only about that remuneration or compensation, it's also about that reimbursement. So ensuring that things, simple things like paying for parking or mileage or bus fare or babysitting, it's what are those things that you need to be able to be involved in that project, and ensuring that they are covered for you. You shouldn't have to be paying out of pocket to be able to be involved in that work. And so being aware of what that can look like. And there are, of course, a lot of different policies and considerations around that remuneration. We don't have the time to necessarily get into those specifics, but there are additional documents that we can share with you. I know it can affect people's, say, disability payments. Again, it's very context specific around where you live, but little things around that you want to be mindful of as well. And so, at the end of the day, you just want to ensure that not to be afraid to ask those questions. And most of all, if you don't understand something, you can say that. You can say, I don't understand. Please explain for me, because you have the right to understand what it is you are preparing to be engaged in or get involved in. And so I will end it there because I know we have quite a few questions, but we did provide a few resources. These, of course, are very Canadian centric, but nevertheless, there is a lot of relevancy and usefulness no matter where you are living, because again, they're really delving into those core concepts. They look at, there's a roadmap, it's an interactive tool that explores that research process or cycle and how you can be engaged. There's one that focuses on child health, again, relevant to a variety of conditions, not just the child health. More you can learn about being engaged as a reviewer. Then, of course, one that you can sign up for, but nevertheless has a lot of value. And so I'll end it there. I thank you all very much for joining us today. I know there's some questions. And Elaine, is there anything else you'd like to a note you'd like to end on?
Yeah, I think just back to that whole compensation question, unfortunately, you aren't going to get very unlikely you'll get compensated the same as if you had like a job. Okay. So I think it's at this point, unfortunately, still more sort of a token of appreciation and a thank you rather than like meaningful actual pay. So I think we're moving there though, because when we first started down this road, like I know Kristi and I can talk about the fact that there was no pay. Right? That it was like you didn't get paid, or maybe you get a gift card for Starbucks or something like that. So at least we're now working towards that, at least here in Canada. And this idea that researchers are reaching out to patient partners as they're forming their applications and saying, how many hours I'm expecting. Can you do this? I'm thinking of compensating you like 25, it's usually 25 to $50 an hour, Canadian. Okay. So, is that okay with you? Do you have this kind of time? So, in an ideal world, that's where it would be. And it would also be a more true reflection of the amount of time and energy that you're spending on these research projects. So I don't know what it is in all the other countries, if there are rules around that, but it's certainly, I think, as we start to see more research funders saying you're going to have to do this, that it'll get there. It's going to be slow, but I think eventually it'll get there. Any other questions? I think like that we had a question about the chickenpox vaccine, and yes, it is just the regular old live chickenpox vaccine. That the reason they started the research on the chickenpox vaccine, though, and not the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, is because there is a treatment for chickenpox exposure. Whereas with measles, mumps, and rubella, there isn't a great treatment. So, of course, the idea being that if they give a transplant kid the chickenpox vaccine and they do end up getting chickenpox, at least they can go get this treatment. With measles, mumps, rubella, there isn't. So Addison took part in this study as a participant as well. And she did manage to seroconvert. So she's now immune to chickenpox. And, we've had a couple of scares during her schooling time where we had to pull her out of hospital pull her out of school because of a potential chickenpox exposure. And you think of the anxiety, the time, the not just the physical aspect of having to rush home, pick her up from school, keep her home at school, not really sure what's going on, but the mental anxiety of that, that's not necessarily part of the study, but those are the benefits of research. It's beyond just the science part. I'm happy to answer any other questions if anyone wants to jump on. Somebody says, I have so many gift cards, I don't know what to do with it. If you can do a gift card, why not cash? Yes. Here we've shifted towards cash. And I think, maybe if that is it's a great point. Maybe you could suggest, well, can you give me, can I submit an invoice for my time instead of a gift card?
But I think there's also a lot of considerations, and that's why having these discussions right at the very beginning and understanding also what some of those limits, those constraints are by the research team itself, because a lot of times the funding, there are limits around how patient family partners can be remunerated, how those funds can be used. And so sometimes researchers, it's not about the fact they don't value your contribution and want to say provide payment, full payment. Sometimes they're limited by those constraints of the competition or that funding stream itself. And so I think having those discussions early on and understanding where both parties are coming from, it just really sets everything up for more success and understanding. And so, and avoiding any potential animosity down the line around not feeling, valued or appreciated.
Yeah. And I think a lot of you guys will have your own experience and skills, right? Not just like I'm a patient, because your life is so much more than that. So for example, I talked about being in the world of communications, and that one of the research projects wants me to help with their KT. So that is not being involved as a patient partner. That is actually providing my expertise. I mean, it's maybe a little bit different than if they were to hire a communications person, from a Google search, because I do have that patient lens. But for that, they need to compensate you at a professional level. So, if you start to get really involved in research and they realize, oh, you have like a government relations or business analyst background, and they're like, well, we could really use your skills in that area to help the research, then the conversation needs to change, because now you're at that $25, $50 an hour, or the Starbucks gift card is really not going to cut it. So, you have to value yourself and the time that you're putting into this, because it's worth something. It's worth a lot to them. And in some cases, they're not going to get funding unless you or someone like you is involved. So just remember that you're sharing of your expertise, and that's worth something, and you should be compensated.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to put limits as well on that relationship. You know, you don't want to be taken advantage of. And if you're in the case of Elaine, where she has those dual skills, both as a patient partner, but expertise in communications, you want to ensure that they're not trying to kind of pull a fast one and use your professional expertise because you're there as a patient partner, right? Because that happens, and it doesn't always leave a great taste, I think, in our mouths around how that engagement experience unfolded, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So I think we'll wrap it there. But, we're happy if anyone has further questions to follow up. We're happy to have people reach out to us and let us know if they have more questions.